Hey there, this is Dan. You're watching this LTC. I am channeling the power of Slaanesh today. I am full of burrito. Lord Glutos would be proud of me. And I'm going to record this before I slip into a food coma, just like Slaanesh would with a belly full of elven souls. Beast of Chaos. Brute Resilience is going to be their reaction. When they're targeted by an attack action, melee style, but before the hit rolls are made, you take one down from the damage points from each hit. I still don't think it affects crits. This is maybe the number one thing that needs to be FAQ'd by GW. They've got this on, 27 different factions. It's either really good if it does affect crits, or it's almost unplayable if it doesn't. So let's get this FAQ, and then we can actually say if these reactions are any good. It does nothing against cheap chaff models, right? So anyway, we'll see where the FAQ falls on this one. Looking forward to clarifying that one up. So for their ability changes, Beast of Chaos, as far as I could tell looking at the sheet, only had one, and that was Bring Down the Storm. It's now a triple. It used to be a quad. It's only on Dragon Ogres, so either the Shaggoth or the weird little old ones here. 83% chance is a pretty good chance, but it's just kind of a regular dice value damage. It's not super special. I mean, it's going to be good in treasure or hunter missions, of course. All of those abilities are. It's possible I'm undervaluing long range damage abilities because you can do them into combat, whereas you can't shoot into combat anymore. So maybe, I mean, who knows, right? But maybe these things like Bring Down the Storm, maybe part of why they aren't more aggressive is because that's more valuable now. Who knows? Either way, I don't think it's a game-changing triple. Beast of Chaos profiles. So I want to thank Dr. Pleco for putting together a spreadsheet with a very similar format to the spreadsheet I was using in my first few videos, which made it really easy to copy paste everything over. I would not have finished the 2 videos that are going to come out this week if it weren't for this person's work on Reddit, so I'm really thankful. So first, Bulgors. They weren't bad before. The only thing that was wrong with Bulgors was that Dragon Ogres were a teeny bit better. Now Dragon Ogres took a little nerf, and Bulgors actually got better for some reason. I think they're going to be good. Doombull, no change, right? Still going to be a total boss. Yeah, love Doombulls. I think you're going to keep loving them in this edition, which, as it should be. People have different opinions on whether it's right for Games Workshop to make their coolest fighters their best ones. I think it's okay, though it's funny with the Doombull, the GW sculpt. See, this is why I don't ever get free stuff from them, is because I say stuff like this, but the GW sculpt is not one of the top 5 scary Minotaurs in, on Etsy, for example. So alt sculpt Doombulls are still like miles and miles ahead of anything that Games Workshop has produced in kind of the Minotaur theme. Hopefully it gets a redesign soon, but until then, those proxy Doombulls, they're still going to be so good. Bray Shaman has a really cool pull ability, right? You like the first Fang from Untamed Beasts has, not worded exactly the same, but you get my meaning. It loves the wizard buff. All of these unplayable wizards have been buffed quite a bit. It, went down 45 points and only lost 2 wounds. That's it, right? That's an amazing improvement. Some people were playing Bray Shamans anyway because the ability, I never get that much use out of it, but some people, they really set up and plan for it, and they love just thinking 2 rounds ahead of when they're gonna use the pull to win the game. And I think it's really great for that reason. And I do, I can absolutely see how it could be competitive, even if it hasn't been in my testing games. It's just because it's not my test or my play style, right? I could absolutely see this Bray Shaman buff making it so that the Bray Shaman gets into competitive Beasts of Chaos lists. That's totally possible. Their chaff choices, I think, are interesting. Gore got nerfed, and then Ungor got brought into line with them, so it's much more flat at the bottom there. There's not a huge difference between the two, honestly, so just choose whichever one you like better, really. Probably pretty far in the future, but I will I will end up looking at sort of the different flavors of chaff that are available to you in this edition and which ones kind of are helping in which space, and that'll be when I actually do these sorts of in-depth comparisons between the similarly pointed chaff in different factions, right? Obviously, Cities of Sigmar, I went over that one in a previous video where they have just a lot of very similarly pointed chaff, right? Beasts of Chaos do as well. I think a few factions, they kind of went that route of trying to make you make tougher choices in your list building, even if the difference in value between the choices is a lot less. So let's get to Khorne, right? Khorne's do is the reaction. Both the Khornes have it. After their targeted melee style, for each hit roll that misses, you allocate 2 damage points. For each crit, you get 1. Or you get 1 on this fighter, right? So it's like Khorne, it incredibly fluffy, right? Khorne cares not from whence the blood flows. So for every time your opponent misses you, Khorne punishes your opponent by dealing damage to them. And then every time your opponent crits you, it's like Khorne gets really excited and the crit hits harder. It's incredible, just such an incredible just like communication of what Khorne is about on the battlefield. As far as is it good, I don't think it's that good, but it's fine. You know, it's one of those, it does a little bit more damage than counter, so that's good, right? Because, so this is just going to do 1 extra damage for every regular miss roll than counter would. And when you know you're going to die, you don't care about taking that extra 1 damage from crits. So it's just a strict upgrade to counter, in my opinion, but I still don't think it's game-changing because I don't think that the reactions that strictly replace one of the universal reactions, I just think that that's less of a value add. Time might prove me wrong on that one, but, you know, who knows. Khorne ability, there were a couple changes. This is where I want to thank Requisen. This is another, you know, habitual Redditor. Although I think I found this on the Discord. Put together a little spreadsheet, just really easy to read, of all the ability changes and sort of explained pretty well. Again, man, thank you to everyone who's been putting these on. It was really tough last week to keep up with the changes. I'm almost done, just this video and one more. Yeah, there's so much with this new edition that has changed, and I just really, I appreciate how sort of the community has come together, and we've seen how big the community really is as far as people kind of figuring out and delving into this edition change. So first of all, Gorefist was reworked. 3 damage on a 3-up. It used to have way more variance, so you just couldn't rely on it for anything. I mean, you still, like, 66% chance you don't want to just, like, completely do your whole strategy on making it work this one time. That's going to be a bad thing, but just in general, it's way more useful this way. Even if the top end of damage that you can do is a lot less, you don't really care about that because it's just so much better at sort of finishing off a low wound fighter, which, again, I think maybe in my previous videos I underestimated that. Because you can't shoot into combat, you can't get the value from having just one random archer in your list. So maybe these abilities are more valuable than they used to be, who knows. Rage of Khorne, that's the Bloodstoker, the guy with the weird banner. That's his ability. It used to be range 16, which was pretty cool because it would cover most of the board. In fact, depending on where you were positioned, you could cover the entire board with it. And so that led to a lot of really funny build-around lists where you could just spam a fighter that benefits extra from it. I don't know anyone who actually built those lists. I remember a lot of people talking about them. Either way, at range 8 now, I just think it's a lot less usable. Range 8 is pretty big, but the idea of just getting, you know, your whole board, because it's a, you know, it's not a great deal otherwise if you're not getting your whole board on it. So that's too bad, but, you know, maybe someone in GW built it because they have access to every model already painted, right? So I'm sure I'm sure they've tested a lot of the wild lists that that the community never really got to put together. And so I would bet somebody probably tested this and played it, and it was probably too good. There were no changes to the demon abilities. I don't know why. It's terrible. It's just like, it feels like bullying at this point. Like there's just one faction with half as many abilities as everyone else, and they're just like, no, we're not going to change it. We're just going to leave this ridiculous half faction in the game. So Khorne Bloodbound. Blood Reavers unchanged. So for the most part, you know, if you were a Bloodbound player before, chances are your list is still, if it's, you know, not, it's going to be within a few points of being the same, right? Or at least pretty valid. They were good before. They're still going to be solid. I would say that staying the same is a tiny bit of a nerf. In this video, you're going to see a lot of factions where their chaff got like tiny nerfs, but overall, we've seen more more buffs at the bottom end than we have nerfs. So I would say if something stayed the same, that means it got a very minor nerf. Tiny. It'll still work fine, but just a little bit of a nerf competitively. For your casual games, that's not going to matter at all. This is also just good times for elites who don't do anything but smash, especially in Khorne. I kind of like that they've done that. I like that, you know, they've kind of created this specialty in Khorne that's sort of a little bit more clear now than it was before. And what I mean by that is just that, like, Khorgoraths, yeah, they lost 5 wounds, but 55-point discount, that's crazy. They're going to be really good. I think the Deathbringers, Aspiring Deathbringer, Exalted Deathbringers, both of the different Exalted Deathbringers, you know, those coming down in points and keeping the same damage profiles, especially the Exalted Deathbringers getting only 2 wounds down, but going down 10 points and 15 points, respectively. You'll take that trade-off every time, especially because, you know, they're not going to get one-shotted off the board, so they're going to get their licks in at least once, and so you're just having an easier time fitting them into lists, and they're going to do a ton of damage. The number of times 2 wounds makes the difference as far as which round they die in is, you know, going to be pretty small compared to 5 wounds, which, you know, obviously more than twice as much. Blood Warriors. Blood Warriors are probably playable now. I've been kind of tinkering around with Slaughter Priest lists, and I think I would probably want to put a Blood Warrior in there. So I still don't think that I would want them as my backbone unit, my backbone of my warband. I just love the way Blood Reavers run around the board. But, you know, you could do it if you have a bunch of Blood Warriors. I think they're more something you can consider taking as the backbone of a list now. You know, obviously I'm still skeptical, sort of, like I said, skeptical that they'll work as like a main competitive list, but they're much more playable. Jugger Riders, that's my term for everyone on a Juggernaut, whether it's the Jugger Lord, various Crushers. Khorne names are just so ridiculous. I have such a tough time keeping a straight face while reading Khorne names. Anyway, all the Jugger Riders, all the Juggalo Parades, they're all going to work a lot better now. Or at least be a lot more compelling. They might not be better, I mean, they did go up in points, but so maybe I shouldn't say a Juggalo Parade, but like one Juggalo. I've gotten rid of Jugger Rider mid-video, don't worry about it, not going to edit it out. One Juggalo is going to be a lot better in a list, I think, than one was before, because it's just going to be higher impact, and they were never very efficient before anyway. That's not where you were taking them. So they're just going to be much higher impact, which is great. But of course, at that higher points cost, it's going to be really, really tough to spam them, especially with, you know, the mount keyword, the stairs buff to mounts, the fact that they can climb stairs now helps them a little bit, but that's going to come into play on what, like 1 out of every 3 boards, right? So it's, you know, it depends. Obviously, in your own personal games at home, if you love cavalry, you should probably run terrain with stairs on it, right? And in those situations, I think a lot of these Juggalos are going to be good. Khorne Demons. Let's have a moment of silence. Alright, so Tzeentch reactions. Twist of Fate. After they're targeted by an attack action, but before the hit rolls are made, pick one of the hit rolls and change the value of your doubles to that value. I think it's really funny. I don't think it's going to be very good, but it might be. Who knows, right? The reason I don't think it's going to be very good is that the uses in Tzeentch are pretty limited. Their abilities that kind of go off the dice value, you know, Tzeentch Demons, I just think they have like 2 pretty low impact doubles. So that part's not very impressive, but what you can do is bring in an ally into Tzeentch, and if you have an ally where they have a double where the value on the dice really matters, then Twist of Fate is going to be really good for you. Just like put some Brimstones into your list and just run them up and Twist of Fate with them, and I think you'll really enjoy it. Though, again, the caveat there is that doubles are really manipulatable with your wild dice already. It's really easy to use one wild dice to just make a random 6 you rolled into a double 6. So I don't know. I mean, I'm skeptical about this reaction, but I just love when they go weird with them. I just love the factions that got a weird reaction, and I would have a lot of respect for anyone who decided to choose their ally based specifically on maximizing Twist of Fate equity. I think that'd be really cool, and I hope I see it sometime. Split and Split Again were changed from abilities to reactions, and I think it's great. I think, you know, the fact that they gave almost every faction one reaction but then like broke it when it really made sense, I think just is really brave design choicing, and it's just like designing to win, right? Just as opposed to designing to be careful, and I really love that. So when they're targeted by an attack action, after the damage is totaled but before it was allocated, you kill the fighter and put down 2 more fighters. It's so flavorful because the time you would use it is when you're going to get killed anyway, and so it fits the lore perfectly. It's exactly what happens in the lore is what happens here, as opposed to before it was like, oh, an injured horror just spontaneously combusts. I mean, that mostly worked to convey the idea, but it wasn't like perfect the way this is like actually picture perfect. I think it's potentially a lot more powerful too. Who knows? I don't know how much more powerful, but the fact that you can wait on this action, the fact that it doesn't cost your dice, and it doesn't cost an action either, right? Because it's when you would have died. I guess it does cost action economy because it does mean that your opponent is free to kill any horror that hasn't activated yet, which is a bit of a problem. It does make you change your playstyle with Tzeentch. You're going to want to activate your horrors last, which is not what most factions want to do, just because usually you want to sort of be opportunistic with your highest impact fighters, because you want to just get the most value out of basically the high impact, you know, activations that they give you. So you almost never want to be forced into going first with them, but this kind of does force you to do that because otherwise you just completely lose split equity. Maybe, you know, maybe that's going to be fine. It's not going to be a big deal. It's just like a very slight, subtle handicap that isn't written here. Either way, though, I do think it's going to be powerful. Just one note, both of these, Split and Split Again, the one that makes 2 blues or the one that turns a blue into a brim, both of these are going to count against you. It specifically says the fighter counts as being taken down. So like in Reaper or other hunter missions, it does count. You don't get to like cheat the system that way. So definitely not worth it to do this in those missions when it wouldn't have killed your guy, for example, because you don't want to give up those points. Tzeentch abilities, tons of tinkering here, which was important. Now, whether they got there or not, we'll get into right now, but it was really important because Tzeentch, a lot of people would complain, like, why does Tzeentch, the Trixie faction, have the worst abilities in the game and like some very strong individual like beef fighters like Zangors? It just like they felt like they felt the way they played almost the way like Khorne should play, right? Not the way you would think Tzeentch would play. So they made some changes, and let's see how they did, right? So Lord of Fate, nerfed. It used to be a triple. Now it's a quad. I would never take a Fate Master now. I just feel really sad about it. So not a great start. It was one of the best triples of its kind. That buff triple, just having such long range. I mean, it was just, and then being on a 10-inch flyer. Just a really powerful thing that you could do. So the fact that it's a quad, I don't know, maybe if they had made it more powerful to also be a quad, then that would have been fine, but they didn't do that. That's okay though. So let's take a look at the two, the Enlightened and the Skyfire abilities, because they got changed quite a bit. Guided by the Future was buffed. It's a triple now. It used to be a quad, so I guess flips with the Lord of Fate. It adds half the dice, so it's really good. But it's really swingy too, because Skyfire's the most attacks you can get in one activation, because Guided by the Future only does one activation, right? The most attacks that it can get is 3. So you're only adding to 3 dice rolls, adding half the dice. So the number of hits you're going to get is going to be a lot less. Now, it's also got the advantage of being a ranged attack, which is just more, ranged damage is just more valuable in general because you're not at risk of reprisal as much. You can sort of choose, you can be more efficient with where it goes on the board, etc. You know, all of the reasons why range is good. But just in terms of numbers impact, it's just really low. So it's maybe on average, it's still going to be valuable for you, but because you can't count on it, when you can't really count on something, I don't love it from a spiky sense. Guided by the Past, though, was hugely buffed. Now, still a triple, adds the full dice value instead of half the dice. That's insane. So that's a huge buff. Zangor, all the Zangor Enlightened get it. But the Zangor Enlightened on disc is now extremely good at one-shot killing like fairly large buff heroes now. I'll get more into that when we look at the points, but man, did that piece got way better. Latching Bite got nerfed. Now it only adds half the dice to strength instead of the full dice roll. You're not going to notice because you only ever need to add 2 to strength. Like the most you ever need to add to strength is 2 anyway. So you're just not going to notice the difference, even though it's technically a nerf. Pink Fire was nerfed. Now it deals damage on a 4-up instead of a 3-up. Again, this is the video that's giving me my conspiracy theory about they're worried that long-range abilities are getting more valuable now because of the nerfs to shooting, and so they're sort of afraid to afraid to make any kind of burn spell good because they're worried it'll take the place of shooting. I don't actually know if that's what their actual thought process was. It's just it feels that way, right? So let's actually get into the points on these Tzeentch Arcanites. So the Fate Master, it got double nerfed, right? So when I said before I wouldn't take it, what I was referring to that I couldn't show you yet was the fact that not only did the ability become useless, but they also made it go up 10 points. Very, very sad. The Enlightened Aviarch on disc, though, this is the headliner. So points went up 10 points. Stat line went down 4 wounds, and yet it is so much better now than it was before. The reason is the ability buff is insane. So before, your maximum was a 3, right? So that's still really good damage, right? That means you're essentially dealing 5 attacks, strength 4, and then I think it's 5s and 7s if you have a 3. Well, now it's 6s and 8s if you get to have a 4. It's 7s and 9s if you have a 5. It's 8s and 10s if you've got a 6, right? It's absurd. So if you have the ability on a 4, your average activation is 21.67, and that's also where the 50% line is. So you're greater than 50% to kill a 20 wound model. That's incredible, and that's just if the ability is a 4. For DPA 4, so this is any toughness 4 fighter, you're on 16.3 is your average with the ability being a 4. There are a lot of 16 wound heroes walking around trying to use abilities that are going to be in this edition because of the ally mechanic. The Enlightened Aviarch on disc, it flies around, it spikes buff heroes. That is what it does, and it is incredible at the job. If you have a better than a 4, because remember, again, all of these buff heroes, they all went down in points to get you to use them more, but they went also down in wounds to make it harder to keep them alive, right? So this Enlightened Aviarch on disc is the reason it's hard to keep them alive. If you're ever worried going into a tournament that the meta is going to be very buff hero heavy, right? If you're everyone's using Swift of the Wind, everyone's using Lead from the Back, which we'll cover later in this video, that just give me 10 minutes, right? Everyone's using Swift as the Wind, everyone's using Lead from the Back. What do? What you do is you Enlightened Aviarch on disc them. I wish it had a catchier title. Someone give it a nickname and put it in the comments. Please, because I don't know if the meta goes this direction, but if it does go this direction, the Aviarch on disc is the answer to that meta. So it's a lot less attractive to take if you're not worried about buff heroes. If no one's running buff heroes, it's a lot less attractive to take. But man, if you think that in a 4-round tournament you're going to face off against two lists that are completely reliant on these small buff heroes, that AV Arc on disc is going to win you those two games like outright on its own. It is just unreal, like the power of just being able to kill a leader in one shot, right? In the last edition, I talked over and over, I talked your ears off in first edition about the importance of being able to one-shot kill chaff models. The ability to one-shot kill buff heroes is going to be incredibly powerful in this edition. I'm taking twice as much time on Tzeentch as any other faction just to like talk about how like excited I am about that, but I'll stop now. Kyric Acolytes. They were buffed. Not enough. Zangors. They're good. They're still solid. The regular Zangor stayed the same. It's a great piece. It's pretty hard to kill, and it moves around well, and it does respectable damage. I don't know how it got away with all that for 75 points, but it's good. It's a really good chaff unit. And the other Zangor, which were just like really far behind it, they're just better now, and they're much more comparable. So now you have much harder decisions between your various different Zangor, and I think that that's a great thing. So let's take a look at Tzeentch Demons, right? So Pyrocasters. Kind of interesting here. One of the only artillery pieces to see a buff. We saw nerfs all across the board. But the Pyrocaster, who was not one of the better artillery pieces in the game before, but actually did get a buff and was playable before, that might be a big deal. So I think if you love Tzeentch Demons, having a flamer heavy build, you know, regular flamers got 5 more range, the exalted flamer got fewer wounds but also 5 more range, so it's actually easier for them to kind of stay in the back now. So the wound nerf doesn't really hurt the way it would because you also have the range buff. So I would say overall losing 5 wounds and going up 5 range would actually be a buff to them, and you know, one of them went down 5 points. The huge horror changes in points, right? So pink horrors went all the way up to 135, blues went up 10, brimstones went up 5. Couple notes here, right? So one, maybe it's because they decided, no, it's not, because they're using an algorithm, but okay, so the flamer's getting better. Actual lists might just turn different because it's going to be hard to put a wall of horrors in front of your flamers and also use your cool split abilities, right? Like your brimstone horrors, you could get a bajillion of them into a list, but then you're not splitting at all. Whereas like a pink horror, if you want to go down the split chain, you're going to have to pay for it, and that's kind of too bad because again, your opponent can really play around split if they're out activating you. Now if the meta turns really elite and very few people are running sort of 9 model warbands, 10 model warbands, if the meta turns elite, then all of a sudden pink horrors get a lot better because your opponent can't out activate you, and so now, you know, your wall, you know, not your wall, but like your 4 pink horrors wandering around the board, your opponent can't play around them, and so now you're getting a ton more value out of them. So just a lot to think about with the horror change. Tzeentch Demons are really just a completely different faction is the actual lesson here. One minor note, I didn't talk about this enough with the Arcanites, but it's also here with the Fluxmaster and the Changecaster. Tzeentch really enjoys the wizard buff that we're seeing all over the place. Lots of little Tzeentch wizards that are a little bit more interesting now than they were before, or things like the Ogroid Thaumaturge, which is one of the most beautiful models in Warcry that really hasn't gotten its day. Going 50 points cheaper with none of the profile nerfs that you would expect to see, and then also having 5 more range, although I don't know if you were really taking it for the range ability. But either way, just like exciting stuff with the foot ability heroes that we're seeing on every faction that has a bunch of them. They're all getting buffed. But you know, Tzeentch, sort of both flavors are sort of more excited about this change than most factions. So let's go to Nurgle now. Impossible to wound. When they're targeted melee style, but before the hit rolls are made, you get to subtract 1 from damage points by every hit. Again, needs an FAQ. very fluffy for Nurgle, right? It just makes perfect sense with what they're about. But again, I refuse to get excited about this ability until an FAQ tells me otherwise. Their abilities, though, their regular abilities, kind of funny. The changes are actually hilarious, which is what it should be for Nurgle. Jolly Gut Pipes and Sonorous Toxin went from 6-inch range to 7-inch range because, you know, the memes, right? +1 range on the aura. It's actually really relevant. I should have put a diagram here. I'm sorry. I'm a fake YouTuber. So if you deploy where your buff hero is in the back of your deployment area, I know you have your little 3-inch bubble around your spot, and your fighters, your people who actually hit things, are at the front because they need to be, because they need to get into the action. If you do that, you can pop it, run forward because you only get eight move, right? So you get 8 move, but you start an inch behind them, and then you get forward, and now having that 7-inch range will actually often hit behind you, or like touch the fighters behind you in a way where 6 inches would not have done so. So this is actually kind of relevant if you plan around it, which is cool. For the other auras, again, +1 range on all the auras. It's nice. It's very fluffy. I don't think it's a make or break change on any of the other auras. It doesn't kind of change the fundamentals of how they work. But it is there, and it's fun and cool. And, you know, eventually, sometimes, maybe it'll come up. The Nurgle profiles. I'm going to do, humans and... They're not human, but mortals and demons in the same piece, because Nurgle actually doesn't really have a very wide roster for Warcry. First of all, there's Plague Bearers. 45 points is way too few. They had them go up in points, but gave them an extra toughness. I think that verisimilitude-wise, like in terms of what the lore says Plague Bearers do versus what they actually do, I do think that this is a good change. 50 points is really cheap. So they either came out even or they're stronger, because a whole nother toughness with counter existing as a thing is really good. I talked in a different video about how I think Ossiarch Bone Reaper counter control is a thing. I think that you can do it with Nurgle as well using all Plague Bearers. Sloppity Bile Piper went down in points. That's just a big win for the whole Grand Alliance, honestly. I think that Sloppity Bile Piper's ability is probably the second best, or the second most compelling, I'd say. Not the best, but the second most compelling ally ability if you want to bring in a buff hero for your warbands. And so just Sloppity going down is just like great for the entire Chaos Grand Alliance. One note about Beasts of Nurgle. People were already playing Beasts of Nurgle at 175 points. They kept their Slime Trail ability, which is an excellent ability, and they went down 25 points. I would say Beasts of Nurgle are very solid now. Now, for movement, they're still slow. They're still, having the same issue Nurgle always has. Expensive slow models can be tough in a way that cheap slow models don't have to deal with as much. You don't notice the low speed on Plague Bearers nearly the same way you'll notice it on a Beast of Nurgle, even though the Beast of Nurgle does go 1 inch more. But I would just still say these Beasts of Nurgle, that ability is so good. The attack profile is perfectly relevant. I think that they're a great pick for Nurgle lovers. Rotbringers on foot, big buffs for all of the Blight Kings. I think you got to keep going. I don't know. It's possible, right? I mean, all of these kind of Chaos Warrior God-marked versions, they all went down in points. You'll see as we keep going, but and I guess Tzeentch doesn't have one, but Blight Kings, they went down. Chaos Warriors went down. You'll see Painbringers and stuff went down, right? All of these mid-sized things went down. Games Workshop clearly knows about the mid-size trap, whether they've heard me yell about it on various videos or if they sort of figured it out in their own testing, I don't know. They clearly have thought about the mid-size trap, but that doesn't mean that they fixed it here, and I think that I would need someone else to prove it at an event before I would try to prove it at an event, if you catch my meaning. There are huge nerfs for the Fly Riders, which is kind of too bad. there's of course always the tinfoil hat that maybe they're suffering because they're just so ridiculous in Age of Sigmar that Games Workshop kind of, they know what's good in each game, right? And so often they don't try as hard to give something good rules in Warcry if it's really good in Age of Sigmar. Maybe trying isn't the thing because it's like all it takes them is just writing some stuff on a piece of paper. But who knows? I'm rambling. Either way, it's just tough on the fly riders. The Harbinger of Decay though is nice. Like you do have some options for going fast, but yeah, the Lord of Afflictions got a pretty big nerf. Everyone who rides a fly, so maybe I'd be more tempted to just use the Harbinger of Decay if I wanted someone fast in my Nurgle list. Who knows? I'm usually very averse to horses, but we'll see. Skaven. So they have Musk of Fear. After an enemy fighter finishes a move visible within 3, pick another friendly within 3. They get a bonus move or a bonus disengage, and they have to end more than 3 away from the enemy fighter that made the move action. Really cool. So a bonus disengage for an ability leader is insane, right? I just talked about how it's going to be harder to keep your leaders alive this edition. Like that Plague Priest there in the background just can't wait to get free disengages when people try to take it out. That's going to be really powerful. You're going to be able to do things like jump to an objective, engage to a different target, right? There's no rule that says you can't end less than 3 away from a different enemy fighter, right? So you can do actually very silly things. Like they're trying to get a... let's say they're trying to like body block a Storm Fiend or something, right? You use an action from a Plague Monk or a Packmaster or something to bonus disengage the Storm Fiend, and then the Storm Fiend can walk over to the thing that they actually want to kill and get an attack off, whereas before they would body block, then you have to disengage and walk over. So like trading one, I mean I already said this for Gloomspike Gitz for example, but anytime you can trade one activation from a cheap fighter to one activation from a ridiculous fighter, you're getting huge value there. So things like Storm Fiends are going to be really happy about this in your list, which we'll see later, but could be kind of interesting and relevant. Scurry Away was buffed. It's a 2-up now instead of a 4-up. So between these two abilities, this sort of hero protection ability, even though I just explained how you can use it offensively, it is supposed to be a defensive ability, and it will work that way more often than not. Plus Scurry Away. It's going to be really hard to pin down Skaven if you're playing against a good player. So that's pretty cool. I think it's very... it's just very kind of... It fits with what Skaven's trying to do, what the lore says Skaven should do. And I like that a lot. Lead from the back was buffed. 6 inches is way easier to use than 3 inches. This ability was already excellent. I built an entire list specifically around positioning for the tiny little 3-inch aura, right? That's why, you know, all the Plague Monks you see in this picture of my warband I took to Adepticon, look, they've all got this 2-inch reach, right? Because I was making sure that I could basically put like a hedgehog formation or a porcupine formation around a Plague Priest so that I'd be within this 3-inch bubble, but then I'd have these 2-inch reaches to be able to reach out and essentially make my full bonus attack bubble a like more than 5-inch bubble, right? Because I'm also using the bases. So I basically built the entire list with that kind of positioning in mind and had a nice little record. 6 inches is just going to be so much more easy to use. So that's a big deal. I think that people playing that, you know, in real life are just going to find just the ease of use of this to be just a lot more powerful than it was before. They also buffed my Recite from the Book of Woes. I basically never used this before because it was a quad, and why would you ever use any quad that's not Rampage? It seems like they kind of got the message with that. They still have a lot of quads that are worse than Rampage, but a lot of their cooler quads, they made triples if they were bad. You'll almost never use it, but it'll be really sweet when you do. Skaven profiles. The first thing, when I first saw Skaven, I was like, oh no, everything's ruined because Giant Rats went up 70 points. That hurts. That really hurts. giant rats are they're not basically unplayable. You cannot play a giant rat now, which is fine because I always kind of hated them until I started playing Skaven, and then I started loving them. But that's some that's clearly bias, right? So what they did do for Skaven was buff all the big titans, which, remember, there are some ways that big titans can benefit from the reaction, but you never want the titans actually reacting. So things like double rat ogre lists are going to function pretty much unscathed from how they were before. I think Storm Fiends in lists gets a little bit more attractive now than it was before. I think there's a lot you can kind of think about for what you'd want to do with a Storm Fiend now that, you know, maybe you couldn't do before. Unfortunately, Plague Monks going up 5 points, it doesn't make them awful, but it just makes them nothing to write home about. It makes them kind of boring and average. So, I mean, that's fine, right? Most fighters have to be boring average fighters, or at least maybe not boring, but at least, like, you know, not the most competitive thing. But it does just mean that if you are all in on Pestilence heavy Skaven, which, as you can see, clearly I am, my only non-Pestilence unit is that Storm Fiend, those lists are going to be a lot harder to build now, right? You don't get your giant rats, your Plague Monks have gone up. My, like, one kind of fun, silly Plague Censer Bearer, which would be really powerful in the very few times when I could make it work, that's gone up a whole bunch. 15 points is a lot at that points cost. So it's tough. Also, you know, the leader points drops, right? All these Skaven leaders all went down in points and just, like, lost some wounds, but that was it. Better for other factions than it really is for Skaven. Let me kind of give you, I won't actually math it out, but kind of let you know. So, like, first of all, it's a lot easier to clear the crowds in Skaven, right? So their reaction is really good at either getting more value out of your Titans, which did get buffed again, or your leaders, which did go down in points. So the targets of your reaction are better and cheaper now than they were before. But the ones actually doing the reaction are cheap things. So you have to have the cheap things, and they're not the ones that are going to be hard to pin down. They're going to be really easy to just pin down and one-shot kill really quickly. So it's going to be really easy to clear the crowds in Skaven, which means that lead from the back, you're not just going to catch 5 Plague Monks in your lead from the back and then just, like, delete your opponent's warband in one round. That was something that I could do before, right? It was something that I actually did achieve in a couple games before. You're not going to be able to do that now. Also, the things that benefit most from lead from the back are things where, point for point, they have very high damage efficiency, but it comes from a model with low attacks, right? Something that has, say, 3 attacks, but each attack does a lot of damage. All of a sudden, lead from the back, you add 3 attacks to it, you're doubling the damage, and it was already points efficient anyway. So, like, Plague Monks and Censer Bearers fit the profile perfectly of what is good with lead from the back. Well, they were both nerfed. 15 points and 5 points respectively. That's quite a bit, right? However, in other warbands, sort of profiles that are lead from the back shaped, I'll call them, right? Like, the same damage efficiency, but coming from a low attack, high damage profile. Those are the things that really benefit from lead from the back. Those didn't get nerfed in other factions. Other factions still have, in fact, like Khorne has a bunch of damage profiles that, like, fit the bill for lead from the back, like, perfectly to a T. All of these other factions are just, like, really happy about the changes to the ally mechanic and the fact that Skaven leaders all went down in points, right? So now your Skaven Deathmaster was hard. That's like a really powerful assassin piece. 10 points is a little bit more attractive there, but also things like, you know, your Greyseer, your Plague Priest, those discounts are big. And so I think that Skaven is going to show up more in non-Skaven lists than you actually see Skaven lists on the table. I think Skaven lists on the table, it's going to take a little while to figure out, like, does this mean that I go with more Titans and I just have an elite warband? Like, is Skaven all of a sudden, even though you have this reaction that is pushing you to play cheap fighters, do you actually just take the buffs to expensive fighters, ignore most of the reaction, and just go that way? Or do you just say, like, I mean, this is where, again, why I said double rat ogres are kind of unscathed, is it's actually kind of nice to use a pack master to reposition a rat ogre, and then you only need one action anyway to give the rat ogre double attacks. So you're kind of, once the battle is joined, once you are in a team fight, you don't really care about your pack masters all of a sudden becoming one activation fighters. They're doing their job. They're delivering the rat ogres, and then they're boosting the rat ogres. So, you know, those rat ogre pack master lists are going to be either just as good, maybe better, although likely they'll still miss the giant rats. But they're still going to be pretty good. But kind of any of the more sort of, again, I've gone around to actually explaining why I guess Pestilence Heavy Skaven is kind of a loser here. The Slaanesh reaction. Shared Pain. After they're targeted by a melee attack, but before the hit rolls are made, for each hit, you allocate 1 damage. For each crit, you allocate 2 damage. This is to, again, the attacking fighter. So, it's pretty funny. So, I like it better than Counter, by a lot. The reason I like it so much better than Counter is, 1, Slaanesh has toughness 3 across the board, right? So your opponent never misses when they fight you. 2, Counter is at its best when the opponent is whiffing, which has 2 effects here. 1, obviously, again, like I said, you don't miss Skaven or Slaanesh. But 2, it's like Shared Pain helps you when you needed the help because your opponent had a good roll. Whereas Counter helps you when, actually it helps you when you didn't need the help because your opponent had a bad roll, and that's why you're getting to counter them. Win more mechanics, which are basically when you're winning, you get a little bit more win. They're almost always less powerful than catch-up mechanics, which are when you're losing, you get a little bit more win, because they take games that you might have won anyway and they just boost it, as opposed to taking games that you are kind of on the verge of losing and then giving you more of a chance. So Shared Pain, all I'm saying, is just a lot better than Counter because of all that. Slaanesh demons are going to be completely unrecognizable than they were before. Now the question is, did they have to do this? Was their hand forced? I kind of think it was, because they decided that they're going to go to an all allies all the time list building regime. I actually think that you can build lists without allies and it's going to be fine, but it's just so much more attractive now than it was before, and you get 2. Well, the Contorted Epitome had the most influential ability in the game, I would say. It was, you know, the one that probably dictated the flow of the game the most of any ability in the entire game. So I think they kind of had to nerf it. Now, whether it would be to give it a fail rate, whether it would be to do what they did, which is make it a quad, whether it would be, you know, even maybe just to make it like a net plus, like a net that does something extra. Who knows? But it's just going to be different, right? So, you know, you get your demonettes. They were unchanged. The Enraptress was buffed a little bit. I was actually pretty impressed with what the Enraptress could do before. So now having 3 more range to be sort of better at picking things off is going to be nice. Now, again, you can't attack into combat, but the Enraptress profile is really good. Fiends got a pretty huge buff. So they went up 10 points, which is too bad. And they went down 5 wounds, which is also too bad. But they do a ton of damage now. The +1 damage is, you know, to make a 1/4 into a 2/4, which is pretty influential in terms of the actual, like, damage per swings that you get. And then, you know, Fiends are still pretty tough to kill at 25 wounds. So you're going to just be able to run them around the board and just really, really affect wherever your Fiend goes. It remains to be seen if you can go, like, all Fiends. I don't know that I would go that direction, but you know, mobile things that do damage are nice to have, and Fiends are that now. Hellstriders were also buffed, but unfortunately they start with like this pre-nerf that makes it so you can't play them because they're such ugly models. So Slaanesh mortals, the good leaders got nerfs. The Lord of Pain and the Slake Khorne were really good before. They got nerfed. That's too bad. The second leaders are fine, and they all got buffs, which is fine. I still might take a Slaanesh. Ooh, sorry. As I said, the food coma is coming at me. I still might take a Slaanesh because you get that extra bonus move, which is just so good. If you don't know, Slangor Slaanesh and Slangor Fiendbloods they can just do a bonus move on a double, which is just an insanely low rate for that, where they just have to end closer to the closest villainous enemy fighter. And that's usually what you want on these pieces anyway, because your Fiendbloods and Slaanesh are damage dealers. The wizard buff, again, I wonder if it's better with the Shard Speaker. Now, it is funny how the Shard Speaker has kind of always just been a worse Enraptress, but now it's actually pointed the way a worse Enraptress should be, which kind of makes it a little bit more tempting to use. You could even have a list with both of them now that would be kind of easy to make and kind of interesting. Huge buffs for the armor box. Simbaresh, Myrmidesh Painbringers, all of them went down in points. A couple of the Twin Souls actually went up in power while going down in points. I think it's all just like a pretty big deal. Now, how playable are these things? I don't know, but like if you watch my Slaanesh deep dive, 25 points off of a model that we were considering whether or not we should use anyway, I think that absolutely brings it into playability range. So I do think that the armor box is going to be a lot better now. I think some of the Twin Souls you were already happy to play, so the fact that they've gone down is really nice. The other question, 55 points, how many homunculi do you have? Because I think it's pretty reasonable to just put 2 or 3 homunculi into your list, even if you don't really have a plan for them. And that's really cool. I think that that's going to be something that Slaanesh couldn't rely on that kind of thing before. Now you can, although I don't know what monster has like enough homunculi to sort of spam them. I have 2 and that's it, just because I have 2 things of Bliss Barbs. I can't imagine anyone having more than 3, but maybe not. Maybe in this world, I've heard whispers that AOS factions are going up to 5 by 11 Bliss Barbs. So there might be some people out there with 5 homunculi who want to give it a shot. Alright, Slaves to Darkness. Boon of Fortitude. After they're targeted, melee style, remove 3 damage points allocated to this fighter. This is the strongest of the damage reduction reactions. One of the Cities of Sigmar has this as well. The difference is that Slaves to Darkness uses this a little bit better because Marauders have range 3. They're harder to kill, right? You don't have to run into combat to attack with them. So they're going to be just harder to take down, which means that healing them is better. If Slaves to Darkness becomes more popular, I think burst damage becomes really important. I think that's also true if for some reason people start playing a City of Sigmar that isn't Tempest-Eye. Burst damage, being able to one-shot chaff becomes a lot more important. I think it's become generally less important, certainly with this edition change, but that just changes if Slaves to Darkness becomes popular. You really, really want to have burst damage against your Slaves to Darkness opponents. They had a few abilities that got changed as well. The first is Shield Ram. It goes off on a 2+ now, which is good. It deals 2 on non-6s, and then you get the dice. Just a solid little extra damage ability. Nice to have. So Lead the Slaughter was buffed. It now adds 3 instead of half dice, which is... I'm not editing these out. This is just real. This is me. 3 dice over half the dice. Huge EV bonus. Really awesome to have. Knights of Chaos was buffed. It hits all the knights globally. Completely useless in Slaves to Darkness. Completely useless. However, it works on allied Juggerlords pretty well. All the Juggalos only move 6 inches, so actually adding to their movement is a lot more valuable than the 8-inch movement and sometimes 10-inch movement that your cavalry has. So run on over to Khorne, bring Khorne on over to you. Something with that, if you love the Chaos guy on Karkadrak, if you love the Chaos Lord mounted, whichever way you like it, In any direction, it's just going to work better combining this with Juggalos. So let's get into the points, the actual factual points. The Marauders, I thought could have had a bigger nerf. So the reason is factions that have good chaff and they have a good reaction, they get this like ready-made playstyle out the box of like, hey, let's try reaction control with them. Now, maybe that's a good thing for some factions to have, but either way, that's something you can try in Slaves to Darkness. You can try to put a bunch of Marauders on the field, react every time you get hit, see if you can heal up faster than your opponent is hurting you. That's always going to be pretty funny. We don't have, obviously we don't have any data on whether these things are good. I'm kind of skeptical, but it's interesting. I think it's worth trying if you've got a whole bunch of Marauders. We also have a question, does the stairs change make the Varanguard scarier? That's something that I'm wondering, because now you get 3 different weapon options. That's kind of nice. But, the classic problem with all these mounted or super expensive units, including the Juggerlord that I just recommended again for no reason. Varanguard are better than Juggerlords, and yet here we are. But the big downside to them is that, not every board has stairs. So if your board doesn't have stairs, this kind of buff that all the mounted people got doesn't matter to you. So let me know in the comments what boards you guys are playing on. I know that some people find really popular the one where it is kind of like a raised dais in the center, and then there's sculptures around it, and then those are stairs that a Horse Lord could certainly get up. Slaves to Darkness, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about their just like incredible stable of just badass foot heroes. I mean, look at the improvements that the Dark Oath War Queen got. Well, okay, yes, -5 wounds, but +2 attacks, that's crazy. That's so much more damage. So a lot of these, even though they got weaker also, just going down in points that much is a really big deal. So, I think you've got a lot more leeway here to try out various foot slogging fighters. But, who are you kidding? You want to play Varanguard. Chaos Warriors. Just worth noting, like I did for Painbringers, like I did for Blight Kings, all of those guys are all going down in points. Doesn't make them playable. Who knows for some of them, but for these ones, I do think so. I do think it makes them playable. But, your mileage will vary. Test it out on your own. That is what we've got for Chaos. There are a bajillion different Chaos factions. The same is going to be true of Order. I'm going to be doing Order last, well, the second half of Order last and next, and I'm really excited about it. Of the factions I play, probably half of them are in this next group, so that's exciting. So we'll get into that, and until then, may all your rolls be crits.